G'day friends, welcome to the Doll Parts 2x6 stamp set tutorial. It's going to be kind of long and chatty, I'm assuming, so I'm just going to get straight into it. I've got the base body that we're going to look at here. Now this is doll. This is a ball jointed doll stamp set, so even though it is a tool to really help you see how bodies connect and where the joints kind of go and how to get a good feel for illustrating bodies, it's not an anatomically correct body. I don't think many people's body actually joins this way, but it will give you a really good understanding as to like how to shape all the limbs together and how to get some really dynamic flow in your posing and stuff. So it's a tool. Like a lot of the stamp sets I design, they are blueprints for illustrating on top of or using as reference to help you with your drawing and your illustration. So we're going to go through how to create the very standard body today, and then I'm going to show you some of the important features to note when you do want to make more interesting bodies and kind of get a little crazy and experimental with it. I'm not going to go through everything because, I mean, you can see how many pieces there are. There are literally so many things you could do with it, but some things to note, especially with the legs, because I think that's where some people might get a little tripped up. I've mentioned this before, but it is a 2x6 stamp set. It is really, really tiny. So if you have dexterity issues, this might be a little difficult for you to use. It's kind of an advanced little process to go through. That's why I've got the tutorial today. And also, I wouldn't recommend this for small children just because of the small parts. So just something to note before we start. Anyway, let's put this over to the side and let's create our base body. So I'm going to take a piece of paper. I've got an ink pad here. This is a VersaFine ink pad in vintage sepia. I'm a bit of a hoarder and have 65,000 acrylic blocks, so I've actually put all of my pieces onto different blocks just so I don't have to change it out every 2 seconds and you can see it come together quite quickly. I don't want you to have to sit here for 50 years. So I've got a head here, I've got the upper body and lower body, feet, the joints, I've got hands and arms here, and these are legs. So this will help us to go through quite quickly. Let's just stamp the body out from top to bottom, how it's displayed here. I want to keep this stamp set here so you can see it, but I know there's a bit of a glare going on. Even if I do take it out, the acetate sheet will still provide a bit of a glare. So, I mean, I'll try. I guess we can see if it's a little better. There we go. Let's just leave that like that, and hopefully you can just reference that if you are kind of confused about the shapes. Now for a lot of these really, really small stamp sets, you do just want to stamp it quite lightly to get all of that detail. If you start pushing too hard and rocking the stamp, it's just going to, it's not going to pick up all that fine detail. The VersaFine ink is pretty good as well, but I would recommend using a lighter ink for this because if you are going to draw over the top of it, some of these construction lines are still going to be really, really visible if you use a darker ink. But for the purposes of filming, I do like to use some bolder inks so you can see. I might actually bring you close to the workspace so you can see the body. Okay, now I'm going to stamp my torso, which is this upper body part here. I'm just going to ink that up. I'm going to connect the neck just at the chin area. Now things don't have to connect completely perfectly because the essence of these stamp sets is you are going to connect everything around the outside. We'll go through that once this is done. So you don't, if there is a gap, it's not going to matter too much, but you want to keep that kind of close unless you want a super long neck. She's already got a bit of a long neck, so you know, that's just personal preference. Let's put the lower part of the body on as well. I'm just going to stamp it so that this little part of the waist connects where the little opening is just there. Oh, I should have wiped off my stamp set. See, that's the problem having both on the block, because I'm going to get some transfer down there as well. Alright, I've got my joints here. Now I'm going to use this hip joint, which is the largest circle. I'm going to put those two hip joints right in that socket, just on the lower part of this hip here. You can see there's two little arches there where those hip sockets, those little joints go in nicely. Whilst I've got my other joints, I'm going to take this circle, which is not the smallest one. This smallest one is the elbow and the ankle, but I don't really use it for the ankle a lot. But that's the elbow and the ankle. This one's the shoulder one. It's the medium-sized circle. So you've got a tiny one, a medium one, and a large one. The medium-sized circle is going to be our shoulder joints, and I'm going to put those in this little socket that you've got open just here. Next we're going to do the arms, and I've got these two pieces here, so we've got an upper arm and a lower arm. Now you don't have to use both of these together. You can use two of the upper arm or two of the, it depends on how long you want it, I guess, but it does kind of work neatly with the upper arm, the elbow joint, and the lower arm. You can see if you look really, really close, there's a little dip on each side, and that's to show you that it's supposed to connect to that circle joint. So where it's wider at the top, and it's a very slight change in width, so it's not going to matter too much, but there is one side that is a little wider. You want to connect the wider part to the top, to the joint at the shoulder, and it should just sit nicely on there. I'm then going to grab my smallest circle and put those two little elbow joints right there to attach to the end of that upper arm. And then again, this one is slightly wider at the top than it is at the bottom. So I want to make sure that that wider part connects to my elbow joint on both sides. Now, if you do go a little wonky, it's not the end of the world. I mean, stamping, I'm getting ink everywhere. I should have done really should have moved these off, but it's been working for me in my tests. It's just classic that when the video goes on, I'm going to stuff it up. I was just saying, if you do go a little wonky, it's not the end of the world because we're going to connect all of this up at the outside anyway, but it is stamping. So you could just take this away and move a new piece of paper in and start again. It is super quick. We've done all of this in the matter of like a minute. So before we move on, I'm going to grab these little hands, fingers towards the outside. I like to keep them at a right angle to that wrist here. And her whole upper body is done. Now, I just want to mention before we do go on, you don't have to do the whole doll together. You can just stamp the upper body part. If you have a different face that you want to put on it, but you just want to put a quick body on there, you can do that. If you just want to put legs on a little drawing that you've done before, you can just stamp the, the waist and the legs out. You don't have to build all of this doll at once. It is just to help you blueprint out bodies and whatever parts of the body that you need. Before we go into any more of that, let's just put the legs on. So I've got an upper leg here and a lower leg. Now, neither of these are marked as left or right because they're actually interchangeable depending on the pose that you're going for. So we'll look at that in a second, but for now, let's just match these shapes up. Like we did with the arms, there's a wider part at the top and then it tapers down to a thinner part at the bottom. So the top part is where we're going to connect to our hip joint. For this pose, I'm going to have that curve hitting the outside, so we can see that our thighs have the curve on the outside. That's not to say that you can't invert it, because there are certain poses where those will be different. We'll look at that in a second. Now we're going to grab our knee joint. This is the oval shape, and the oval shape connects in this socket here, and the interesting thing about the knee joint is that you actually want to place it wherever you want the lower part of the leg to go. So if I wanted this lower part of the leg to kind of bevel off to the side, or if I wanted it to cross over or something, I would actually angle this however I wanted that to go. Now, because she's standing straight up and down, I'm just going to make it go straight up and down. That comes in super handy to note when you do want to start shifting the legs and crossing them over and stuff. So again, we've got the curve on the outside of our doll's legs here. So I'm going to grab the lower part of her leg and just stamp that straight down. Again, you have the little opening up the top, the little curve that hits that knee joint. Just going to wipe off the excess with my fingers. I know it's going to get messy, but it's just a demo. It's fine. So for these legs, the curves are going to the outside. But again, that doesn't mean it's a left leg stamp and a right leg stamp. They're just leg stamps because they are interchangeable. And for the feet, I'm going to grab these 2 feet and point the toes towards the outside and just connect them at the bottom. Now, I'll put the ankle joint on one side so you can see the difference. It does just provide a slight little bump when you go to draw it, but it's not the end of the world if you forget that one. I typically don't use the ankle joint. In fact, when you do get better at this, hopefully one day you could just leave the stamp altogether. I personally still use it because I don't want to have to draw everything. Like, I don't want to draw all the template. I just want to skip that bit when I'm having some fun. But you can leave the joints out because they're just a guide to make sure that you know what connects to where. And especially when it comes to the things like the knees, to know how to connect the top part to the bottom part. So the joints are there to help you, but not totally necessary. So we've got our doll stamped out here. Now, the only thing left to do, if you could decorate her just like this if you were ready, but I just want to show you how to connect it. So we're going to take a pencil or a pen or whatever you've got, and I'm going to run around the outside of everything. So I like to call this process, I like to draw it in, but I also like to think of it as carving, because I'm kind of carving out that shape from the blueprint that I've got. I like to flesh it out a little bit, but if I feel like there's a little gap missing, I'll just softly round it around and I'll connect everything together. This is probably why you want to go with either a water-soluble ink, then you could watercolor it away, or you could just use a really, really light ink pad. Like I have the ink in wheat. This is quite a light ink. You could even second generation stamp, like you could stamp some of the image off here and then just have the ghost image on here. So it's very, very light, and then you can use this to trace around the outside. Things like this here, I don't necessarily want to cut into my circle and then cut down to my leg so she's got bumps down here. You could, that's a look. It's not the look that I prefer. So what I'm going to do when I get to her waist is just curve that down to meet the outside of the thigh. And this is what I mean by carving. It allows for you to get in there and start to shape that body how you would like it to look, and also kind of overcorrect any of the mistakes you might have made if you shifted the stamp a little too much sideways or something. So we're just going to go around the outside of the entire stamp and connect everything together. When we get to the lower body stamp for the legs, you do want to connect it to this little point here and then come back down. Again, this is just a doll, and this is not realistic. There may be some people on the planet that have this body shape, but it is more about the ball-jointed doll aesthetic than it is anatomically correct. So when we get to the ankle joint here, this is where I'm just going to bump it out a little bit, and you can see it just adds an extra little joint down there. I don't find it completely necessary, but it is there just in case. Here you can see I've decided not to take that waist all the way in. I think I'm going to thicken up her waist a little bit. And again, connecting down through the outside. I've got this little dip at the elbow here, so I'm just going to run that down smoothly so it doesn't dip like that. Remember, this is a base. This is a blueprint. You don't have to stamp it out perfectly. You're just looking to use it as the tool to get you to where you want to go. And then the face is obviously stamped out. I do want to mention I did try to make her face ethnically ambiguous. That was a personal choice that I made. So I know it's a bit of a different looking face than I've done before, but that was specific. And I really do like how she turned out, especially her little hair there. And I love her big lips. If you're feeling like just putting some clothes on her so she's not nudie-rooty, we've already got this lower part of the swimsuit, let's call it, stamped out. We've got this little arch down here, so we can just color that in real quick. And I might just put a curved line going from shoulder to shoulder point. I'm just going to quickly shade that in for a bit of modesty. And there you have it. That is the standard doll. The next thing I do want to show you though is probably where it starts to get more exciting for me. So let's grab a new piece of paper. I'm going to stamp out two bodies side by side. So I'm going to put one over here and one over here. I'm going to pop their torso on, and I'm going to slightly angle them in towards each other. Oh, I didn't stamp that well. There we go. Let's just do that. I'm going to angle them slightly. As you start to build these angles in, you'll see that it's interesting how they connect, because that joint, you can rotate it, you know, pretty much all the way around. If you want to go crazy with it, it's going to be a little difficult to see all the outlines if you cross it too much, but it is possible. However you can joint this and connect it, it's going to work. So I would suggest that you really do play with how exaggerated you can get some of these curves. This is what I loved doing when I was a little boy, just playing with the dolls and really twisting them and posing them. So I'll do a slight curve over this side. She can be a little bit more natural. The next thing I want to do is add my joints. I'm doing all of this in the sepia at the moment because I'm going to do the legs in a red and a blue just so you can see how you don't need to change the stamps and you don't need to think of one as left and one as right. At the moment, we've just built a nice little dynamic pose into the body and we're popping our little joints on, just in the sockets that we mentioned before. I'm going to leave her arms for a second because I'm more interested in the legs right now. I've got a VersaFine satin red color that I'm going to use, and I've also got this Tim Holtz Distress ink in peacock feathers. I do love using the Distress inks. I do find that for these stamps, they're very, very detailed, so the Distress inks don't give you the most crisp impression for the stamps that are, you know, really, really small, but you can still use them. You might just want to start off by practicing with something that's a little more visible so you know how to connect it all together, and then I would just suggest you use whatever you feel comfortable with. Let's go over here and we'll stamp it out like how we know it. So when we did our sample, we had this side was the red. I'm going to put her little knee joint on here. I'm going to angle it slightly so I can start to change the direction. So our curves facing outside to the left, that's going to be in the red. Now we're going to put our blue on. Another little knee joint. She's going to be a little knock-kneed in this one just because that's what that pose will look like since we angled it a little bit. And just for a laugh, let's put on the feet as well. The toes pointing out to the left will be in the red, and pointing out to the right will be in the blue. Now you can see that this starts to look a little odd because the feet are facing the wrong way for that calf. Or you can see that something's not quite right there. We could change up a few little things to try and, draw it in properly. But here's why it's important to note that you don't have to use this as the legs on the right-hand side, or technically the doll's left, and this is the legs on the left-hand side, or the doll's right. Because we're going to change them now, and we're going to take the red side, because this hip, I feel like, would push a lot more of that curve out on the side. You could look for a photo reference and try and see this actually. If you just typed in some like fashion figure poses on Google, you would start to see how this, whether the inside or the outside of the thigh is more straight or more curved on different figures and different poses. But for now, we're just going to show you how they can be the same stamp. So I've already got that red one there. Now I'm going to place it just out to the side as well. And I'm going to put her knee on. This time I want the knee to come back to this leg. So I'm going to twist my knee joint so that it faces back. And what I mean by that is that if the knee joint is going straight up and down, then if you put a line through the center, that's where the top and the bottom peak of that oval would be. If we want the knee to come down this way, then we want the top and the bottom peak of the oval to run through that cross section. So that's why we've got it going through this way, and this one's going down this way. Now she's going to be standing on this leg, and it's a little hard to see if you don't know how figures work. So I would recommend getting a reference photo if you're just trying to recreate something specific. But we would normally use the red and the red, right? But this time we're not going to, because the way that I want this leg to come down, I need to use the other side. I need to use the blue side so that there's a nice curve in her leg, and she's standing on the supporting foot, which is the red one, in a way that shows that she's actually supported on that leg. So her leg is turned out. All of that to say, we didn't do red and red. This is actually red and blue this time. Now, as I come to bring this part of the leg back in, I do need the red side because the calf is going to be facing the inside. And technically this curve represents the calf. So I'm going to connect it to my knee joint there, which means I'll bring it back in this way. And I might use one of the pointed feet this time, which would be the blue side. And can you see how that looks like it works, even though we've changed up how it's presented on the map? And that's just because I couldn't figure out a way to give you all the options on a little thing. That's why I thought the tutorial would really help. So if I go to run around this image, I'm going to build that curve in as I come down to the foot. Now, as things cross over, you could decide which crosses in front, which crosses behind. That's up to you. Again, this is why I recommend having a good play with them and making sure that you use lighter colored ink, just so that you're not so confused about where all the cross sections go. And you can see she's got a nice stance there. The arms, like I said, not much to the arms other than the fact that you don't have to use the small and the long one together. You could choose to use the small one. You could just choose to use it by itself, to be honest. If you just wanted this arm to disappear behind the leg, you don't even have to stamp out the rest of it. Or you could choose to use the small, pop the little elbow joint in there, and you could use the small again. If you didn't want such an exaggerated arm, we'll just pop a little hand on there. I personally like the longer arm just because I think proportionally it works better, but I'm just saying you don't have to use that. So let's look at some other legs, because the legs, like I said, that's where everything starts to get a little crazier. We're going to stamp out a few lower body stamps. So we'll just do from the waist and the hips. Got 4 here. I'm going to put all the hip joints in there because as we start to get crazier with the legs, it is kind of good to know how we use these hip joints. And now we've got the thighs, and we've got the calves and the shins, or upper leg and lower leg as it's written down here. You can even see if you look really, really close on the stamp set and the acetate, it says top. And wherever it says top, that's where you're connecting it to that joint. So we've done this side in red, the quote-unquote left side, and this side in blue, the right side. Let's just stamp out a few. So we've got the curves going on the outside of these legs. Let's just flip it, and we'll start like that. But then we'll give the red side to the blue leg and the blue side to the red leg. Now what this does is turns that into the top part of the thigh, and this becomes the knee, and the front part of the shin, and this becomes the calf. So these legs are quite They're quite hyper extended this way, and this will give you a nice arch through that leg, and you could even put on just the little pointed foot for pretty little ballerina legs. But you can see this is where we've changed up the whole thing. If we connect it all down, can you see how that's got a really nice arch going on in that leg? I actually prefer this look for a bit more of a neutral stance than the one on the little blueprint here. So just know that this calf, this rounded edge on the lower part of the leg doesn't always have to face out. It can actually face in. Now let's cross our legs a bit. So I've got this red side. I'm still going to go that way. I'm going to take my blue side. We're still sticking with that. I'm going to kind of have them meet a little bit and put my knee joints on so that they push the bottom part of the leg down towards this angle. Now as I go to do this one, I'm actually just only going to use the red side. I don't need to switch it up because they're both going to be coming down at the same angle. At this point, you don't even really have to use the feet. You could connect the whole thing and make it a mermaid's tail, but let's just put the feet on because we're not going into that just yet. I'm going to put these little feet on. And then as I go to connect, I'll choose which one I want at the top and which one I want at the bottom. Coming around that knee joint and down through the leg. Again, this is why you do kind of want to stamp it out lightly. But if I were to show you where that goes, this is the blue. The blue is going to disappear behind, and this is the red. And the red actually attaches down to this part, and here as well. So here's the red, here's the red, here's the blue, and here's the blue. Now suppose we just use one side and don't worry about any of the other sides at all. That's actually a super fun one to do because it really helps if you've got someone sitting. So let's angle this up. This time we're actually going to cross over the hip a little bit and we're going to bring this leg right up. Again, this is why you have the hip joint so you can swivel that around and see where you want to put it. As long as it connects, it'll work. So I'm going to grab the knee. I want this leg to come back down, so I'm going to make sure that my oval points in the direction I want it, the lower part of the leg to come back down. And this one I think I want to bring it back, so I'm going to make sure that this oval points all the way backwards. I'm stamping a little bit off today. That's always great for a tutorial, right? Now I've used the red. I'm only going to use the red side on this, so technically just one side of the stamp, only using these parts here. I'm going to connect that to my knee joint and bring that down. And this one, because it's pointing down that way, I'm going to need to connect it more flat. Another really easy way to see if something works or not is to actually just stamp it out. And if it looks crazy, it must be the other foot, right? So I'm going to purposefully use the wrong foot on this one. I'm going to use the red one. And see how that just looks like it's broken? That just means you're supposed to use the other foot. So we'll just stamp the other foot in another color over the top. And hopefully you can see that better. And then as we go to join all of this up, we'll join it how we've been doing it before, just running around the outside. Again, don't feel the need to trace those lines super specifically. They're just a blueprint. If you want to get a little crazier with it, get a little crazier with it. In fact, if you want to grab, a really fun thing to play with is a brush pen when you're joining this all together, because that'll take away some of your urge to control it. And also, the messier you go, the more you can get away with. If you really do try to tighten it up a lot and make it look super neat, people will expect that they connect the proper way. So you might want to save that until you are feeling a lot more comfortable with the stamps. And I would just recommend playing and playing and playing and playing until you get to that point, because there really is no better way to get a feel for something than actually getting hands-on with it. I think we'll leave that at that because we've seen how this works now. I just wanted to show you that even though it's displayed here that the curves hit the outside of this doll, that is not how they have to go. And that if you can find a reference, in a lot of those photo references, you'll see that one part of the leg has more of a curve to it and one part is more straight. Generally, the top part of the shin, if the leg's more flipped out than not, like you'll start to see how that happens, and just choose the piece accordingly. And like I said, if you do get it wrong, it will kind of look a little wrong. Maybe you'll second guess it, and that just means try the other stamp. There's only 2 options, so it won't take you long to figure out which one it is. Just one more thing before we go. I want to do one really quickly for you, just to show you that it's not the end of the world. If they don't match up, if they don't connect, You don't have to stress about it. You can just grab a new piece of paper. I've got ink marks everywhere, but to be honest, I'm just having a bit of fun right now. I'm just playing. If I really wanted it to be super neat, I could, you know, not use the same stamp pad, the same acrylic block for everything. I could try and separate a little bit. I could use a lighter ink, or, you know, I could really take my time. I just don't want you to think everything has to connect and everything has to be neat and perfect. It is a tool. It's just something to help you have a bit of fun, explore a bit. If it works for you, it works for you. If it doesn't, it doesn't. I've made plenty of mistakes stamping the wrong thing as I've gone through this, and I was the one that drew it out. So, you know, it's not like you'll ever be immune from, you know, having little accidents happen here and there. But they're so quick, and I wouldn't stress yourself out. If you forget a joint, like I don't want to put the elbow joint on right now, I'm just going to put it straight on. Don't worry about it. If you've stamped the wrong hand, just, it's fine. Because it is something that's just a little difficult, I would just recommend that, you know, play with it, experiment with it. There are going to be things that you try that, you know, possibly I haven't tried yet, just through your experimentation. If you do find that you're getting a little stuck, or that you just, the whole thing is just a little too intimidating right now, just start with something a lot more simple. Just start with the top half of the body. Just the head, the upper body, and the lower body. But when you get to the lower body, just call it quits right there. Draw a table. She could be a mermaid. You could have this be the ocean. Like, you know, we're not going to worry about legs today because we just want to have a bit of fun, and she's being a little difficult to work with. Then, you know, just whatever works for you. For some people, it will be fun to take on the challenge of puzzle playing all of this together. For other people, it won't be. It'll be quite stressful. If you feel like tracing around the outside is too confusing, then just color it in. Color in all the areas that you see and try and join it that way. See if you can't get a feel for how that body looks. Color it in rather than outlined. Maybe that will give you a better understanding of how everything connects together. If you're kind of tired of the face, or you're just feeling super experimental, grab a different face. Pop that on there. This still has a little neck. It'll still connect. You can try it all over again and see if she doesn't look like something fun. Maybe you do want to draw the rest of the mermaid. You just don't want to stamp everything out. So you just quickly go for the thighs, and then you think, you know what, I could draw the rest of that mermaid tail. Let's just swish it off down there, and, you know, she's there. She's a mermaid right there. It'll take you all of 20 seconds just to try it. And you don't have to show anyone where you stuffed it up. You don't have to get online and show everyone how many mistakes you made, because I have already done that for you. It's just a tool, and I hope that you have a lot of fun with it. I'm going to grab my little sketchbook, actually. I'm going to talk you through some of the other things that I've been playing with. Just hang on a sec. Alright, this is actually where it all came from. These are little parts. This was the little samples to see how they all went together. You can see I was planning out what pieces needed to go where, and so this is kind of where it all began. And you can see here's just one of those really simple seated poses that we saw before. You can see all the working lines still in there because a lot of the time I don't get rid of them. I don't mind the working lines in there. We just flick through here, and I've got a bunch of other samples. So here's one. She's seated as well. She's the same pose as this one. I've got a few here standing. Here you can see that really nice curve in the leg. And that, again, that's where we flipped it. That's where the outside has the curve and then the inside has the curved part of those leg stamps. This was a figure I drew a while ago, and then I just tried to see if I could recreate it with the stamps, and that's how it turned out. So I think it does work quite well. And the thing to note, I guess, is when I drew this figure ages ago, see how this part of her thigh is straight and this part is curved? That's where you know to match up. This is the curved part, this is the more straight part. So that must be the piece I need for here. If you see it down here, you can see the curves on the outside and the inside's more straight. So then I know, oh, okay, when I stamp this part, I need the curve on the outside and the inside's more straight. And that's how you start to translate it. Here you can see this straight part of the leg down here and the curve. Then I match that stamp to that. She's got a bit of a front-facing leg on the inside, so I just chose to have this nice curved look by having the straight part on the outside. But even her torso, you can see the bottom part of the hips are pointing down towards this way, so that's why I stamped them on an angle. But the top half of the torso is pointing up towards the left, so I stamped that part up towards the left. And I think if you just think of the straight side and the curved side when you are looking, especially for the legs are the most tricky part, I think. When you're looking for the straight and the curve in the photo references that you're looking at, it'll be so much simpler to build those bodies. Here I've done one where I just used a die cut as the face, and I just stamped the top half. See, again, I didn't want to do the legs at that point, so I thought I'm going to draw a table, and I'm just going to connect this die cut that I've got. I'm going to give her a little body, and I'm sure there's lots of, floating heads around your journals or your planners that you could just give little torsos to, little bodies to, and it works totally fine, even if you don't stamp out the entire doll. Here I stamped it out and colored it with graphite pencil. Or I shaded it rather. Here's some play and experimentation. This was, instead of doing any of the body, I just did the arms and legs and did some paint marker bodies. This is all other stamping stuff as well. I kind of went crazy with the stamps the other day. This is a witch on a flying broomstick. She was done with the doll part stamp set. This was actually something that I was thinking about for Whimsy Ween for the Candy Corn Couture prompt. I actually stamped out the whole body, colored it in Copic marker, and then I just finger painted this, this acrylic over the top just to give her clothes. So that was a really quick way to give myself a base to work with. Here we've got a bunch to look at. I tried to do a profile version. I don't think the profile really works. You would need a separate piece for the torso. Not to say you couldn't make it work, but I don't think it's simple enough to put in the tutorial. Here's where I really pushed the angles on one of them, and you can see it still worked. It looks crazy, but you can really go there, and I would encourage you to do it. You don't know where that line is until you've kind of crossed it, so I'd like to see where you take it. Here she's just giving me a nice split action. Here I use my Decorah stamp set actually, and I used the Twig Antlers, and instead of using the limbs, I actually stamped on those twigs. So she kind of became like a branch fairy, kind of a pixie thing. And this is why I love stamping them all out, because it's so much easier for me to play in this space and see like, oh, maybe I want to do something with that. Maybe she should have these limbs, or what if she had 6 of these arms? Like, I'm much more likely to stamp it out and want to go from there than I am to sit down and think, what should I draw next? Like, what should my pencil do? When I've got the stamps all in front of me, it's like, oh, I'll put this with that and this with that, and does this go here? And she's got a different face. So this is why I love playing with them. These ones I just stamped. I mean, she's just peeking out the spine of that book, made her more of a dancer, and started to, really take those legs on a journey. This one did not work out at all. I'm sure there would have been a way to make this one work, but I mean, that torso went from so big to such small legs. So again, not everything works. Unless that's your aesthetic, in which case go for it. And here are some more. Instead of using the limbs, I used the bones from the concept stamp set. I used the little leaves from the Decorah set to make little ears, and this is actually a prompt I was working through for Whimsy Ween, the bunny bones prompt. Some of these literally only feature like a small part of the stamp set. Here it's just the face, the hands, and the legs, but you can still create the whole image. So I think if I could just stress one thing to you, it's just don't think that you need to use every single stamp on that stamp set in every single body you put together. Take it for what it is, and if you just want a quick way to give a body to a floating head in a journal page, just stamp a quick little body on there. If you've got a bunch of swatches that you think might look cute with some legs, I mean, just give them some legs. I do like the look of the whole doll together, but I also like the look of changing her heads, because I've got a bunch of other stamps that I might like to use with faces instead. This is a really, really small face to draw, and sometimes I like to play on the face with all of my colored pencils and my mixed media, so I might want to stamp out a larger face with just a smaller body. Or perhaps I've got these die cuts, like I have a lot of these die cuts that are just head and shoulders, kind of like a bust little drawing. So I just gave her a little body to sit underneath it, and I thought she looked quite cute, and it's a super quick way to do it. You know, sometimes when I'm sitting down to play in my journal, I don't want to overextend myself and try and learn how to do the most all the time. Sometimes I just want to play, and I just want a really, really simple, kind of fun, creative thing to do, and stamping seems to be that for me. I'm not a huge stamp collector in the sense that I have a ton of them, but the ones that I do create to use are usually all with the idea that you would use them as tools, not so much as a finished product. So for doll parts, it really was about playing with the bodies, playing with the posability of those stamps, making different figures, even helping you to see how those joints connect, and notice little things about how if you tilt the torso one way and then the hips the other way, that you suddenly start to build a lot of dynamics into what you're drawing. And I think the best thing would be is that you have so much fun with them that you end up learning it and you don't need to play with them anymore. Although I will say, as someone who did draw them, I do enjoy still playing with them, and I think that's because, honestly, I get more experimental when I'm stamping. I don't have to draw it out every single time. I can skip all of that laborious kind of prep process for a drawing, and I can kind of stamp out the ideas and have a lot of fun just playing with ideas. I might want to go and draw this and not use the stamp at all, but this idea might not have come to me had I not been playing with the stamps. So I think they're a really valuable tool, especially for illustration, in helping to unlock some of that creativity that exists more of an abstract place where you're not having to sit down and pull from your visual recall. You can actually sit down with the stamps and just puzzle play, see what happens, and use that to reference. But let's be real, a lot of the times I do just use the stamps, and I use a light colored ink, so I pretend that I didn't use them. Which I encourage you to do too. Honestly, if you get really good at it, I've seen people use the concept stamp sets, the unbothered stamp sets, where I actually thought they drew them, and I had no idea they'd even use that stamp at all. Personally, right now, I'm using the Versa Magic Wheat. I've used the Distress ink in Antique Linen and Victorian Velvet before. This I use for the concept stamp sets because they're a lot bigger. But also you could use the VersaFine in Toffee. Even if you second generation stamp that on there, that's a really good one to use as well. Or just be bold and leave all the working lines in there. Maybe you could paint over it, no one would see them then, but I personally don't mind seeing them. So anyway, here are some of the samples that we looked at today. I hope that helped you. I know it was a little chatty and a little crazy. There is really no simple way to show you how to get the most out of this stamp set because it really does come down to a lot of curiosity and play, and that's what I'd encourage you to do. My best piece of advice is if it looks kind of odd and you like it, run with it. If it looks kind of odd and you don't enjoy it, use the other side of the stamp. And don't be afraid to take liberties when you are lining all of that in. You don't have to go so close to the stamp set that you're drawing in every, misaligned joint and, limb. Use it as a tool, use it as a base, and just see where your play takes you. I think, honestly, if your curiosity kicks in, you'll just end up with pages like this. And if you have half the amount of fun that I had doing it, I think it'll be successful. So, hope you enjoyed that. That is Doll Parts. Again, it is a 2x6 inch stamp set, quite little, but it does work really nicely in these A5 and Traveler's Notebook sizes. I will just say I'm still considering making a larger version. I'm just not quite sure how viable it will be, only because they really do start to scale up. But it is on my mind and I have taken your feedback into consideration. And if I do decide to make a larger set, you will for sure know about it on social media. So thanks for joining me today for this kind of chatty, relaxed play sesh. Hope you enjoy your stamp sets. Until next time, thanks for watching. Bye.